Serene. I am from Denmark. I have lived in all of the world. I've lived in India, the US, Salvador, where else? Armenia. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and human rights from Kingston University, and I have my master's in politics and conflict studies from London School of Economics. So I have studied a lot about gender issues, environment, also migration issues, and I'm really looking forward to this lecture today.
My name is Alice Miner. I'm originally from Seattle in the US. I've lived in Denmark for the past 2.5 years, where Selena and I know each other from a fellowship on human rights and minority rights. I've studied migration and politics, and I know you've talked about migration in past weeks. And I've also had a gender focus to my activism and my academic studies. I'm part of a queer feminist collective in Copenhagen that works in disrupting gender stereotypes surrounding music and art and politics.
Great. So today we're going to talk about gender, social inclusion, and human rights. I'm just going to go over the topics that we've chosen to talk to you about because it's a huge topic. We figured out that we could do a whole degree about these issues, but we only have half an hour, so we'll try to be as productive and effective as possible. So first we're going to give you a bit of introduction on the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and then on the differences between gender and sex. We have two parts. The first part is about gender and the environment, because we know you've been talking a lot about sustainability, and rights are also very closely linked to the environment. Part two is gender diversity, because gender is more complex than it first appears and as it's portrayed in, for example, movies. And then we'll bring you a little conclusion. So first, I'll start out with an introduction. I know you've read the UN Declaration of Human Rights, with its 30 articles, and as the first two articles, Article 1 and 2, show, it includes the human rights are for all people. It says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And in Article 2, it says everyone, including, all human beings, is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status.
I'm going to talk about the difference between gender and sex now. Because when we discuss terms of gender and sexuality, it's important to understand that we're talking about a huge range of people and a huge range of topics. Sex refers to the biological differences between people with their genitalia and other sex differences. So someone can be born with male sex organs or female sex organs, or can be intersex. And gender refers to the social and cultural characteristics, the way a person feels and chooses to live. And so, for example, in the 50 Shades of Grey TED Talk, 50 Shades of Gay, excuse me, that you watched for today, the woman speaking talks about how she was a boy, then she was a girl, and how people can't be confined by their sexuality. What percent lesbian are you? What percent gay are you? And I feel similarly about gender. I couldn't tell you on a scale of 0 to 100 what percent woman am I, because the lives that we live are much more nuanced than either man or woman. And the next distinction that I want to make is between gender and sexuality. Gender is about how a person feels about themselves. I identify as a woman. And sexuality is about the people we love and are attracted to. And I, for example, am attracted to people of all genders. So I'm a woman, and I'm also, we're getting a notification that it's working. I'm also attracted to men, women, and people of other genders.
So, as Alice just mentioned, for example, when a woman is pregnant, to find out whether she's pregnant with a boy or a girl, you take a blood sample to see if she only has X chromosomes or she has X and Y chromosomes. So biologically, a person with an XY chromosome is portrayed, or is a man or a male, and 2X chromosome is a female. But sometimes there's also a little natural mix-up. So you can actually have XY chromosomes and have female genitalia and the other way around. So it's much more complicated and nuanced also biologically than it is often portrayed.
And the reason we bring this up is it's important for people who fall into these categories outside of the boxes that we recognize for their human rights. So it's important in terms of human rights for all, which is the talk today.
Yep, so I'm just going to talk a bit about the part one, which is the environment and gender. The environment, and particularly these days, we're all brought up with a lot of attention towards how we can reduce fossil fuels and use more renewable energy and sustainable energy. And there is also a very gendered perspective on the environment because both in migration, I don't know if you talked about it, but wars and conflicts, they to a large extent they affect women and children. So does challenges with the environment and sustainability. The WHO, the World Health Organization, estimated that each day women and children spend 200 million working hours collecting water for their families. So this is walking for I don't know how many hours to a fountain or some kind of water source, walking back, and then maybe having to walk again because you couldn't collect enough water. I don't know if either of you have been to the Empire State Building, but it's this huge, humongous building in New York City. It's very, very tall. But with these 200 million working hours spent each day by women and children collecting water, you would be able to build 28 Empire State Buildings each and every day. And this took 18 months back in the day. So this is a lot of hours. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. So if the water sources, for example, dry out, the women and the children will have to walk even further to collect this water. And I'm going to talk to you about this from my perspective, women's rights, children's rights, and environmental rights in El Salvador last fall in Latin America. And I work a lot with also health issues and family issues. So it's estimated that 76% of the households are run by women. This means they do the cleaning, they do the cooking, they make sure that the clothes is ironed or ready for the kids to go to school, and they also do the tidying. Excuse me. The reason this is very the environment is because every action we make as a woman, man, or something else, someone else, is directly affecting the environment. So, for example, we worked a lot on educating, instead of educating the man in the family, which is often what is done in El Salvador, countries that the boys and the men get education, it actually made much more sense to educate the women who are walking at home who might not even be literate. Because when they do the cleaning, we try to teach them how to avoid using too chemically harsh substances to clean and detergents, because first of all, it was bad for their fertility because of all the chemicals. It was bad for their kids' respiratory systems. A lot of them got asthma after a couple of years. I think at the age of 4, a lot of them got asthma because of the way they cleaned the floors. And also it's really bad for the environment because all the chemicals went down into the water streams and the water got polluted. The second thing is, for example, with cooking, talking about health and cooking is incredibly important when there is one person who's in charge of the cooking, because as you can imagine, and if either of you do biology and IB, I did the IB myself as well, you know that a 2-year-old toddler needs different nutritious food than a 35-year-old grown-up person who either works at an office or hard labor work. Regarding the tidying, there is a big issue with, as you will know, in some rural areas around the garbage or throwing garbage away. And the problem with that is when you burn the garbage, it goes into the air, which again is really unhealthy for the family, for the children, the asthma. When they throw it into water streams, the water streams become polluted. And when they throw it in the ground, what often happens is you have different animals walking around or on different fields who might eat these plastic or old detergents or whatnot. And when you then consume these animals, if you eat animals, then your body takes in all this pollution. So that's a huge problem. Regarding the human rights issue of also gender, it has a lot to do with what we value in society. So when we say value, we often talk about monetary terms. And that also often means that despite women in a lot of areas working not 9 to 5 jobs, but working from 6 in the morning to get breakfast ready and then working throughout the day, cleaning clothes, blah, blah, making sure dinner is ready for when the family comes home, this work is less valued. These 200 million hours a day are less valued than someone who goes out from 9 to 5 and collects money. So that is the perception of what work is and how you contribute to your family is also very important. Also, when you talk about human rights, because human rights are for all, and as you can see in the Declaration of Human Rights, it doesn't have anything to do with being rich or having a lot of money or earning a lot of money. Yep.
Yeah, and just to underline, I think an important point that you made, the reason environmental issues are so important in relation to gender is because though we all need clean water, when clean water isn't available, that's um, that's difficult for women. That affects women's lives to a greater extent than it does men's lives because they are in charge of making sure the water is collected.
Mm.
So that was our part one, connecting gender and the environment. And now we're going to talk about the diversity of gender. And as you saw in the short TED talk about women in Saudi Arabia trying to challenge society by driving, gender issues is a big problem in our world, and it's more apparent in some places, like in Saudi Arabia, where it's an act of civil courage to drive. But we want to stress that there is no gender equality at any country in the world, like Emma Watson said in her talk that you saw. Um, it's just more apparent in some places. Even in Copenhagen, where we live, which can be described as one of the most equal, and it has been called recently by Lonely Planet, the travel source, the most gay-friendly city in the world. It's unclear why or by what terms. And just to give an example, I was on a date with a woman that I'm seeing last week, and in a park, and we just were sitting on a bench holding hands, and some young Danish men came by and said something and started laughing at us. So if that's in the most gay-friendly place in the world, that just shows that we have a long way to come. And I think it's important for countries in Europe and the United States to recognize that just because some of equality is achieved doesn't mean that it's a better place than Saudi Arabia, for example.
And my personal stories is, for example, my mother, she was very, very angry at my grandfather because she was a big sister. She had a little brother who was 5 years younger. And back in the day, he was allowed to do everything he wanted, and she wasn't allowed to do anything at all. So this was also a very apparent act of gender discrimination within the family. Um, I also, as I mentioned, I've been living around and also with my family. And one thing my father had a lot of difficulties with was when we were living abroad and people asked him how many children he had. And he said, I have 2 girls. And what a lot of people would say, oh, you only have 2 girls or you just have 2 girls? And he would say, no, I don't only or I just have 2 girls. I have 2 girls. Finally, despite being very educated, and a lot of my both male and female friends are very, very educated, and my partners as well, when we are out, I will be asked, do you have children? When will you have children? Whereas no one would ever think about asking my partner, my boyfriend David, because there is something expected within the gender of being a woman that I should be the one concerned about having children and he should not, despite no matter how much education or knowledge we might have.
And so now to turn to the diversity of gender, I thought it would be interesting to offer some examples from around the world of where gender is not so black and white as man and woman. So a transgendered person, if you haven't learned about it before, is someone who's born with one biological sex and it doesn't match the way they feel about themselves, their psychological gender. And this isn't a new phenomenon. It's something that cultures around the world have celebrated and accepted for a long time. For example, in South Asia, there are the Hijra people, which is a diverse community of people who are born physiologically as men, but choose to live their life in accordance with how they feel about themselves, which often is in clothes and with social characteristics associated with women. Um, and the existence of Hijra it's been part of South Asian society for generations, for hundreds, thousands of years. It's present in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata in India. Um, and Lord Shiva, one of the Indian gods, the connection between Shiva and Parvati merged is Ardhanari, which is a gender ambiguous patron god of the Hijras. Ambiguous means not clear. I want to be clear in my language. A third sex has been recognized in India since 1994, and an official third gender, if you remember the difference between gender and sex, was recognized in India in April 2014. It's also been recognized in Bangladesh. I think this is particularly fascinating because gendered rights and sexuality rights is something that we struggle with in the US, where I'm from, and many countries in Europe struggle with. And our stereotypes from the Western world have made it more difficult for societies in South Asia or in the Pacific to be true to the way their traditions have shown diverse representations of gender. Another example are the Mahu people in Hawaii in the South Pacific. I recently saw a documentary that I'm going to share with you after this presentation about the Mahu people, and they're a third gender recognized and highly valued in Hawaiian society, and they're different than transgender people in some cases, in that they celebrate both feminine and masculine elements and don't necessarily want to transition from one to the other, but hold both in not contest, but in celebration with each other. And the movie that I'll share with you talks about American colonists in Hawaii presented problems for the tradition in Hawaii of celebrating Mahu people, because all of a sudden this third gender wasn't recognized and was suppressed. So it's only now, after decades of the U.S. presence, that Hawaiian culture is reclaiming this tradition. And finally, to bring it back to Denmark, where we live, transgendered issues are huge in the news in Denmark right now. Tomorrow, there's going to be a major demonstration in front of the parliament, Christiansborg Slotsplads in Copenhagen, calling for better medical treatment, more human treatment of transgendered people, because they're still treated as if they have a psychological disorder. And this criminalizes, or this makes the people treated as if there's something wrong with them when they want to be seen as human beings with medical, social needs. So I'll be at that protest tomorrow.
And just to elaborate, when we talk about being recognized, when we're talking about Bangladesh and India and Pakistan, we're talking about the government recognizing, right? So no matter whether the government or the laws recognize it, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. For example, in Iran, it's illegal to be homosexual, and the official statement is there is no homosexuality at all. But because they're Iranians are people as we are everywhere, I don't think that statistics is a particularly. Yeah. There are some questions I can see. Yeah, should we just sum up with the conclusions? Yeah, good.
So one thing we want to stress is that gender issues are particularly vital and important for women, because in every culture, every country in the world, women face specific discrimination because of their gender, and because they may not be paid as much, they may not have access to career opportunities, or they may not even be able to drive freely, as we saw in Saudi Arabia. And it is important to look at gender equality through the lens of female empowerment and education and health that they need, that we need. But gender equality isn't just about men and women. Gender is much more complex and fluid. And if we want all people to have access to the same human rights, we have to make space for more than two boxes, like the woman spoke about in 50 Shades of Grey, because people's identities can't be qualified in two boxes.
And also, just to sum up, a lot of countries where you would actually think that this could impossibly have been not possibly been part of the history. A lot of research has shown that the tendency to favor the relationship between man and women or disfavor any other relationship was brought to a lot of nations through colonization. For example, through the British. Queen Victoria, late Queen Victoria, she banned male homosexuality, but she did not ban female sexuality because she didn't believe that women could do such things. So this just shows that how colonization had a huge impact on, for example, India when the British invaded and colonized, because the hijras had been there through decades before the British even knew what India was. Yeah.
Okay.
Should we take some questions?
Okay, we have a lot of questions. We're going to take a second to look at them.
Yeah.
So, Reina, could you write in El Salvador? Can you work there?
Yes, definitely, Christian. So I had some project work in El Salvador last fall, and my official job was to work on environmental issues. This was what I was paid to do. This is what I was trained to do. But when we got there, the reality was very, very different. So what happened was we could do workshops with all the men in the town, but the problem was they weren't in charge of. So we did workshops, for example, about rubbish collection, but the problem was that the men were not the ones in charge of actually throwing out the rubbish or getting rid of it in any way. So it was like telling me how I should, for example, drive my car the best way, or how I should use less fuel in my car. But the thing is, I don't have a car, so educating me on these things were a bit a waste of time. So what we did instead was we talked to the women about it, and it was here that we could actually see a huge difference. I've just heard back from the community now. There are fewer children with asthma, with breathing, respiratory troubles, because of this. So, and because without health, you can't. Health is also mentioned in the UN Declaration on Human Rights, but without health, you cannot enjoy your other human rights. Because if you are sick or you can't get health care, it's hard to, for example, enjoy human rights of freedom of speech, choice of partner, spouse.
Right.
So yeah. I think that's one important.
Yeah, that's good. It's very exciting to get the questions and feel like you're here.
Yeah.
I feel as if there's a very blurred line between feminism and gender equality in today's society. What is the difference between the two? That's a big question, and it's very important. To me, at its heart, feminism should be about the equality of all people, regardless of their gender. But equality doesn't always mean the same treatment. For example, if someone is born and not given an education and doesn't have the same access to learning how to read and write, but then we have two people, one who's learned how to read and write and is 18 years old and one who hasn't, treating them similarly isn't going to give them equality. Some people will need to be differently treated in order to achieve the same equal rights. I don't know if that's a good example.
Yeah, so for example, if you have two people, you have me, I've never studied medicine, and then you have a person who's a fully qualified doctor. Equality does not mean that both of us could get the job. It means that I, for example, can get the enough, or I'm offered the education, or can actually pursue the education to become a medical doctor, if that makes sense. And the thing, I think, what is often misunderstood with the word and the concept feminism is it might as well be called something else. It might as well be called cauliflowerism, because it's not necessarily what when we talk about feminism, it's not necessarily about the feminine part. It's about the equality for all humans,
right,
no matter whether they're feminine or masculine or somewhere in
yeah,
between or something.
and it's upsetting to me that feminism has become such a dirty word for a lot of people, because to me it's a wonderful word, and it's obvious. It's obvious that all the people I meet, regardless of their genitalia or how they identify, should be treated equally. And I think that's at the heart of feminism. But a misconception is that feminism, some people think feminism means that women should get better treatment. And I think feminism recognizes that historically women have had more barriers. And so we need to be aware of the fact that women have had more barriers to education, to working outside of the home, and recognize that in order to achieve equality. And to take it one step further, because I get all excited about this, intersectional feminism. Is everyone here waiting for people to join the video? Are we live still?
Yeah, it says live.
Okay, we're still, sorry. Yeah. Intersectional feminism refers to including race and class issues into the discussion about equality. Because, well, I'll take the example from the United States, where I'm from. African American people face discrimination that I don't face. So African American women face obstacles based on their race and their gender. And it's important to look at both when we're looking at feminism, because feminism can't mean the same thing in every circumstance.
So just because, for example, you could say that Denmark and a lot of other Scandinavian are very strong feminist countries, it doesn't mean that all men have to see a midwife or a gynecologist at all. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has to be equal. It just means that everyone should be treated with equal amounts of respect and opportunities, dignity, and freedom.
Should we take this one? It has 2 votes.
Yeah, sure. Oh, there are votes. So we're going to do the question on if women and environmental issues be eradicated. All right. So women make up around 52% of the population. And they make up 76% of those who are in charge of the households. I don't think that even if half the population, whether it be men or women, if they started doing all the right things, didn't contribute, so it contribute, of course it would. I think it will environmental issues, and we all about whether you only have X chromosomes or Y chromosomes, or what gender or sexuality you have, that you have more responsibility for the environment. Responsibility. The thing is, what often happens in, and this is not all, I'm mostly El Salvador, is that what happens when the women were educated is that they tell their children. They explain it to their children as well, because they not naturally, but in the El Salvadorian rural societies, they spend more time with their children, so they have more time to explain this.
I wish we could talk to them.
I wish so though. Okay, we're gonna do the next question now.
Should we talk about the activism?
Yeah, you do that.
So the question is, this is a question for both of you. Alice, you talk about acts of activism, like the Saudi woman. What acts of activism are you personally involved with? So I'll go first. As I mentioned, I'm part of a queer feminist collective called Kapow Collective in Copenhagen. I helped found it here 2 years ago. And we serve as a movement and a platform for women and people who identify as a gender minority, so they're not man or woman. In Kapow Collective, we try for women to more space politically and in the arts and music scene. For example, we've started a DJ collective because we found that there's a very male dominant culture in the music scene in Copenhagen and elsewhere. So we do everything from promoting LGBTQ artists and women artists to taking up space ourselves. We also help organize demonstrations. We've helped organize this demonstration tomorrow for transgendered rights. And we meet every week and serve as support for each other, as most of us identify as outside the gender or sexuality norm. And so I feel that it is important political work to encourage each other to be true to ourselves and to live out our difference, that we're more diverse than people think, than men and women. So we meet every week, we do demonstrations.